Welcome to the Dashboard Effect podcast. I'm Brick Thompson.
I'm Caleb Oakes.
Hey, Caleb.
Hey.
So today we wanted to talk about maintaining a data lake and what does that take. So if someone is thinking about building one themselves or they're having it built for themselves, what do they need after they have it?
Yeah, right.
All right.
Right.
So what,
Well,
what does it take?
I think it's easy to think that some of these data things that you build, like a data lake or a data warehouse or something, are like once it's running, it's pretty much that's it, right?
Set it and forget it.
Yeah, and it turns out that's not the case.
Yeah.
Right? There's all kinds of things that are going to come up and that are going to happen, and different than just adding a data source, which is an obvious one.
Right.
Like you're going to need somebody to do that, but all kinds of things which we'll get into, like changing data and updates to APIs and just a general transient failure in your pipeline or network problems and all kinds of things. Like this is complicated stuff and things are going to come up and happen. There's also cost optimization.
Yeah.
There's latency optimization. There's just all kinds of things. So we can get into some of those.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we start at the sort of administrative layer. So let's say, in our case, we run everything on Microsoft Azure on Synapse. So if we've got a Synapse data lake, you just mentioned two things that you need to keep track of. One is, make sure you're managing your costs. Is there a lower cost way to do what you're doing? And then make sure you're monitoring and optimizing for performance. Yep. Are those pretty easy to do?
Yeah, for the most part. So let's just take an example. Like let's say you start out on a relatively new system and you've got a few thousand records in there and you're pulling some data. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say you didn't implement any delta loading because your data was small to begin with.
Can you explain delta loading for listeners real quick? Delta
loading means you're only pulling changed and new records out of your source system instead of everything.
Yep.
And that's a best practice. No matter how big your data is, if you can do it, then do it.
Yeah.
Because it sets you up for what I'm about to explain.
Okay.
The resolution for it. So let's say you didn't do that, and your data grows, and over the next couple of years, you're pulling now millions and millions of rows out of your source system, which is obviously a lot of data. And now all of a sudden, your ETL, which was taking 5, 10, 15 minutes.
Right.
Before, when you're small, is now taking 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
And it's not finishing in time. So you need to have somebody that's paying attention and can see that all of a sudden your runtime has 10x'd, and you need to make an adjustment. So you need to implement some delta loading. That's a little bit extreme, but there's all kinds of things that can happen. Like I've seen where your source system, all of a sudden the rows just blow up inside of a table, and nobody really knew why, but then that table just takes forever all of a sudden. Or maybe you get some gigantic text strings in some columns, and now all of a sudden it's a lot more data, not necessarily more rows, but a lot more data, and it takes a lot longer for it to pull over. So you need to have somebody that's paying attention to that performance.
Yeah, so that when people are coming into work at 8 o'clock, it's not still running the ETL from the night before and they're looking at old data, that type of thing.
Right.
Or that it's not getting behind other scheduled processes so that it's actually not ready.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, so that's the performance optimization. And the other thing you mentioned was cost optimization. Those things are kind of related. If you're moving more and more data, it's going to cost you a lot more. And at the same time, if you're storing data that's obsolete, like let's say that you're delta loading data by storing a copy of data each day, you're going to want some sort of archiving method or some way of removing that old archived data so you're not incurring costs for it when you don't need it. So there's things like that too, and making sure that your cost doesn't skyrocket because somebody put a gigantic text string in one of the fields and now everybody's doing it across your company. So those things can really get you if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, makes sense. So besides making sure things are performing well and that you're managing costs, you also just have to keep track of, are things even running and completing, right? Because you could have a data source that something changes. Maybe the vendor applied an update and changed a column, and it breaks the pipeline.
Right. Yeah, that's a really common one, actually. I mean, an update on a system, or deprecation of a field or something like that is can really, yeah. I mean, it's going to cause your pipelines to fail, right, and your ETL to fail, and you're going to want some way of knowing that, so that you can, one, notify your users, and two, obviously fix it.
Right.
So
there needs to be someone who's catching that alert. We set up email and text alerts, I think.
yeah,
And then someone catches that and then researches it and fixes it. And if they're not going to be able to fix it within the specified time that would be normal for users not to notice, then you need to get some kind of an announcement out. So that's all part of managing it as well.
right. Yep. And you've got to have somebody that's able to do that.
Yeah. So then how far beyond the data lake does that responsibility go? Does that go to any kind of – well, actually, there's probably stuff that's still really sort of part of the data lake still, but is things like data catalog or documentation. Is that person also doing that, or does that fall to more the modeler?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another good question. I think that what you're going to find is that the data person who's managing that system is going to be kind of your resident expert for what's in there. So like a data catalog, they're going to be the ones that's going to be able to keep that up to date and populate it. And they're also going to be the ones that you're going to want to ask questions to of, do we have this data and where is it? So as a modeler, if we go back to our 3 pieces of data, model, and then reporting, if you're modeling something, you're going to be working pretty closely with the person that's managing let's call it data lake for now, to find the data that you need and kind of understand it. Like, you'll look at it once you find it, but that person's kind of going to be that gatekeeper for you.
Yeah, okay. And I guess that person could be your modeler as well, depending on how big your organization is. So you definitely need someone who's devoted to this. I'm guessing for a small company, it's not a full-time role, but it's just a piece of what they do. But if you have a big company that's got, 9 or 10 big transactional systems that are feeding in and hundreds of people that are relying on the reporting, you may have more than a person managing that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sometimes it depends on the data sources, of course, but sometimes 3 to 5 data sources, that can be a full-time job. I mean, especially if what we've seen is that there usually, if you've got 3 to 5 systems, there's going to be some that are very mature and stable and you don't really have to think much about. And then there's going to be ones that are pretty flexible and immature, and they're constantly needing attention. So it can depend on that too.
Yeah. So if you're hiring this person, what are you looking for? Is it sort of what we used to call a DBA?
Not really. Those people. Well, I mean, yeah, you could. It obviously just depends, but a DBA is not. They're obviously a database administrator, right? And you're going to want someone that's a little bit more fluent in, at least for us, something like cloud tools.
Yeah,
and just,
right.
It's like an ETL developer or a BI developer, something like that. Would probably get you a little bit closer than a DBA for this role.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. What else should people be thinking about for managing that data lake environment?
So I've seen before where people think that they can train some of their existing staff on it, which in some cases is true, right? If you've got the right person and they're hungry to learn it, but it really is a specialized skill set to really understand how these things fit together, and be able to troubleshoot them. And it will take some training. It's not a take a couple training sessions and now you're off and running. It's like a couple of months for you to get in, understand the tools, understand how things are flowing, what needs to happen when a failure occurs, those types of things. So there's going to be a learning curve if you're going to train somebody to do it, of a couple of months. And so if you just hire somebody in, hopefully that training curve is a lot shorter.
Or you've got good overlap with whoever's going out.
Yeah, sure, right, those types of things. So, it is, I guess the bottom line is that it's a specialized skill set.
So if you're hiring a vendor like Blue Margin, our company, to come in and do that initial standing up of a data lake and the initial data pipelines, you're going to want to have that person on staff during that so that they're learning about it while they're doing that. Either that or plan to engage us to keep managing it ongoing. until if and when you want to do that. But you need to be thinking about it. Don't assume this is a sort of install it and walk away. Never need to look at it again. It's a living, breathing system.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would be great if you could just stand something up and what you wrote, years ago just works forever.
Yeah.
Reality is that's just not how things happen. People make changes to things and people want to improve, and software is no different, right? They're gonna change things. And same with people are just gonna put data in differently. You're gonna use the system differently. Like that's just the nature of it.
Yeah. You could probably keep it pretty static and not have to do much, but if you're getting good use out of it, the business is using it, you're going to be doing things to it, I think.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Anything you want to close with?
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Caleb.
Thanks.